I've done some speaking engagements, and I'm more prone to just walk around the room rather than stand behind a podium. My great-grandfather, who eventually moved to St. Catharines and died in Tabor Manor, was a lay pastor in Alberta. So that's as close as I'm going to get behind a podium or a lectern or whatever. So if you don't mind me just walking around, I'm fine with that. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I shouldn't be a strange face to some. I was here in October for the mayoralty debates, and it was a pleasure being here at that time, and it's a pleasure coming back again and receiving this invitation. So I was asked to talk about long-term care, and I'm going to do that, and I can't do that without first acknowledging the team that backs me up. So as John has mentioned, I've been in the business here for about 15 years. Started at Pleasant Manor in March of 2000, the year 2000, and in 2006 our board made it an administrative change and went with a one employee of the board model, executive model, and asked if I would be the executive director of both Pleasant Manor and Tabor Manor. So as much as John wrote or read a little bit about my bio, at the end of the day I'm the humble servant for the people that I serve and support at both homes. This presentation is more broadly about long-term care, not so much about Pleasant Manor and Tabor Manor. But while Udo is working on it, okay, there we go. Pleasant Manor and Tabor Manor are serving close to 600 people, 300 at each site, and both are continuum campuses of care, and we'll explain that in a little bit. And we have just over 320 employees. So it's a growing concern, and that's the team that backs me up every day. And it's great to go home to these people here. That's my wife Rachel, daughter Janelle, son Braden, son William, they call him Mini-Me, and our son Isaac. So that's my backing team. In terms of our agenda today, I want to spend a little bit of time demystifying the seniors housing and service landscape, and also look at long-term care oversight and accountability. We're a kind of business that is totally, for the most part, funded by the provincial government, and so there's a lot of provincial oversight and accountability mechanisms in place. We'll just touch on that a little bit. Certainly look at the provincial and regional long-term care landscape. I'm using kind of an inverted triangle to get down to the point about long-term care. And then we want to look at a few opportunities in long-term care, certainly for employment, partnerships, and for business, and some summary and takeaway points, and then questions and answers. So making sense out of the landscape. I was creating this slide, and I intentionally put all these names on here. Then you recognize all these names: nursing homes, long-term care homes, retirement homes, life lease units, condominiums, not-for-profit, for-profit, municipal, independent living, semi-independent living, independent or dependent living, campuses of care, and continuums of campus. And I'm refining the slideshow at home, and my son said, "You know, Dad, that's a pretty messy slide, eh?" And I went, "You know what, that's exactly the point. You hear of all these different names out there, and what's what?" So we want to learn a little bit about the landscape, because each one of these there's housing components in it, there's continuum of care, language going on, and these are words and phrases that you hear on the radio, on TV, in the newspapers, and in your community, and we want to make a little bit of sense out of that. So I've elected to create a graph like this that depicts the health continuum on the independence and dependence continuum, with semi-independence in the middle, and plotting it on a graph that looks a little like this, where there's these categories down here, and how housing matches along that continuum. And if we can accept on the y-axis here that when care starts to increase, housing can change as well. So with that diagram, I just want to go over where some of these housing options for seniors are located. Life lease units and condominiums are typically on that end of the spectrum. Actually, shall we move this a little bit out of the way, Udo, so that people can see? And I'm sure many of you know condominium units in town or life lease units, similar to condo, except there's no real property. People are purchasing and selling the right to occupy the unit. It's like a lump sum rent option. And retirement homes typically fall in here, where there's some independent living and some care provided in the semi-independent living setting. And the retirement homes can either be not-for-profit and profit, and the monthly fees for seniors can range anywhere from $2,500 to $9,000, $10,000 a month. And you're buying not only the rent in the apartment, but also you're buying the care if you need it. And in some cases, if your care goes beyond a certain amount of time per day or per week, then you're asked to maybe leave and go somewhere else where they can provide greater supports. Long-term care homes typically are in this end of the spectrum, where there's 24-hour living, 24-hour supports, and oversight by registered nurses 24 hours a day, and a medical director. From the MO, the modus operandi, we have for-profits. They can be operating in this spectrum. Not-for-profits, they can be operating in this spectrum as well. And for municipal long-term care homes, they operate right here. So little on the housing and health and the MO. We'll move on to our next slide about provincial and regional oversight. So as a model, the Ontario government has different portfolios, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, etc. And in our current setup, we have the provincial government and the Ministry of Health reporting to the government. And Ontario was the last province in the country to adopt a regional health model, and they elected to call it the Local Health Integration Network model. So the province of Ontario is broken up into 14 LHINs, they call them, and we would be located right here numerically in LHIN 4, and you've probably heard the name Hamilton, Niagara, Haldimand, Brant Local Health Integration Network, or HNHB LHIN. And this is the group that operators like ourselves in long-term care have funding and service agreements with to carry out performance corridors within set parameters. So the HNHB LHIN, and that covers from Port Dover to Fort Erie, to Niagara-on-the-Lake and Burlington. In that area, there are 80 community support service agencies, Meals on Wheels, supportive housing, etc., 45 mental health and addiction programs, 7 community health centers on 10 sites, 1 community care access center, often called the HNHB CCAC, and the boundaries for that CCAC are totally aligned with the LHIN boundaries, and 87 long-term care homes, and 10 hospitals on 23 sites. So we're going to, using that inverted triangle, we've gone from housing context, government context, right down to long-term care, and that's the area that we want to focus on right now. So there's 628 long-term care homes in the province of Ontario. And by way of MO or makeup, for-profit, municipal, or not-for-profit, 358 homes, or 57% of the 628, are for-profit long-term care homes. 188, or 30%, are not-for-profits, and then there's 82 municipal homes, or 13%, in the province of Ontario. And under that piece of legislation, AMO, the Municipal Act of Ontario, it's a requirement for a municipality to have at least one long-term care home in the municipality. So long-term care home in our LHIN, as an example, the previous slide said that there was 87 long-term care homes in our LHIN. We want to take a look at the makeup of the long-term care homes in our LHIN. So each home is of a different size. Pleasant Manor, as an example, there's 41 beds in the long-term care home. At Tabor Manor, there's 128. There's bigger homes, Albright Manor, 231, and Lynnhaven, around 248. There's homes in between. All in all, in our LHIN, of the 87 homes, they represent 10,312 of the 78,000 beds in the province of Ontario. And this is the makeup by for-profit, not-for-profit municipal homes. In Niagara, when we get down a little bit further, we have 13 of the 31 homes, representing 3,600 beds, are owned by for-profit business, and 10 or 11.5% are owned by not-for-profit business. And the municipal homes, there's 8 of them. And we know some of their names in Grimsby, Deer Park, and Lynnhaven, Rapple J Lodge, etc. So each community has, Upper Canada Lodge has a municipal home in it. So that's the long-term care home at a glance from Niagara. A little bit about legislation. No presentation on this would be complete without a little bit of legislation, so bear with me. Prior to July of 2010, there were 3 acts that govern long-term care in Ontario. The municipal homes are under the Municipal Homes Act. A lot of the private for-profit homes are under the Nursing Homes Act. And then homes like Tabor Manor that were built in the 50s, 60s, United Mennonite Home, Heidelhoff, Tabor Manor, they were built under the Homes for the Aged. And it was kind of unwieldy for the government to deal with homes under 3 pieces of legislation. So there was, over a period of time, an effort to consolidate, ultimately culminating in the Long-Term Care Homes Act receiving royal assent in 2010, and now all 628 homes, regardless of their MO, are under one piece of legislation. Some long-term care funding. Long-term care is the 4th largest expenditure in the provincial health budget, And there's close to $4 billion per year directed to long-term care and the 78,000 residents living in long-term care in Ontario. A little bit from the micro perspective, each home, this is kind of the funding model that each home operates in the context of their revenue. The revenue for most homes is from two sources. Municipal homes have a third source, and we'll talk a little bit about that down here. So people living in the long-term care homes, the residents, each of the 78,000 residents are paying a monthly fee to the operator. And it can be either a basic accommodation rate or a semi-private rate or a private rate. And basic, you have a roommate. In older homes, it would have been up to 4 roommates in a room separated by a small curtain. And private, you have a room all by yourself with a bathroom. So there's different rates, basic, semi, and private. And these are the up-to-date rates. These rates are established annually by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. So we're not the landlord model where the landlord is determining the rents. These are all governed by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. And there's usually 2 options. One, it's going to remain the same for the coming year, or there's going to be a little bit of an increase. So that's generally the funding source from the one funding source from the residents in long-term care. There's also something funding source called provincially adjusted acuity funding. So if we were to take this room, if we were a long-term care home, my level of care might be really, really heavy. I'm in bed most of the day, and I need a lot of supports, direct care right in my bed. And this gentleman here on the other end of the spectrum, he may be pretty light care, walking around, maybe a little bit of forgetfulness or something like that. And the documentation that happens in the long-term care homes, we have to document the care that's being done on each individual. And it gets translated into a home, an aggregate home-based case mix index, or CMI. And depending on where that number sits on a basis of 100, that will determine the level of funding you get from the province for your acuity-based funding. So it's based on a basis of 100, and the target is to, through your documentation, you want to get to 100. Because if you get less than 100, you get that on a dollar. So as an example, if your CMI was 85.43, from the provincially adjusted acuity funding, you get 85.43 cents on a dollar. If your care is really, really heavy and your CMI is 105.47, you'd get 105.4 cents on a dollar. So if you're operating at less than 100, that's not a really good model to operate with. You want to hit around the 100 mark. The third source of funding, as I'd mentioned, is just for municipal homes only. And they have some advantage in a tax levy. And if you've been listening to the news, and councils across the province are looking at at that levy in particular and asking questions like, should we even be in the long-term care home business? So these are our 2 main funding sources for most homes in the province of Ontario, and then municipal has a third source of funding. On the provincial funded acuity-based funding breakdown, just to get a little bit into the details, so from that acuity-based funding, we get funding in 4 envelopes. 3 of them are restricted. If in your annual spending you're under that envelope, you've got to give the money back to the government. Or if you're over those envelopes, you got to make it up somehow. The 4th envelope of funding is unrestricted. And that is an area where for-profit homes generate profit, the only area. Or if you're over in any one of these envelopes, you can use funding from the unrestricted funding envelope to finance the overage in any one of these envelopes. So it's nursing and personal care. Those are your registered nurses, your RPNs, your PSWs, providing direct care to the residents that are living in the home. They need to be paid. The program and support services, therapeutic recreation. Every home in Ontario is provided with funding for spiritual enrichment, usually up to about amounting to about 10 or 15 hours a month. And that gets funded through this envelope here. And raw food, that's self-explanatory. And in the unrestricted envelope, the other accommodation, that's typically where you hire and pay your maintenance staff, your dietary staff, your housekeeping and laundry staff. So one way to work the dollar to work for you is to reduce your costs in those areas. This is the only area in long-term care where you can turn a profit. So employment opportunities in long-term care, from a job category perspective, long-term care homes in Ontario are employing medical directors. It's actually a standard in long-term care that every home must have a medical director, and you can have attending physicians as well. At Tabor Manor, Dr. Philip O'Reilly and Matt Greenway and Elaine O'Reilly are our medical director and attending physician, and out in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Dr. Reimer, our medical director, and then Dr. Birdie and that whole Niagara-on-the-Lake health team form the basis of our attending physicians at Pleasant Manor. There's physiotherapy funding coming into the home from the government as well. And there's a whole initiative, not on sickness, but on wellness and independence. And with the funding that's coming into long-term care for physiotherapy, the idea is to keep people well and more independent in a time when the acuity of care is just skyrocketing with behaviors and in high-level care. We have registered nurses, registered practical nurses. It is a ministry standard that every home in Ontario has to have a registered nurse on site 24 hours a day. They cannot leave the building. Registered practical nurses, and that's a theme intentionally. I'll get to that a little later. Personal support workers that are providing the direct care, formerly called healthcare aides. The ministry has set a certification standard that people are personal support workers for being able to work in long-term care. Therapeutic recreationists, nutrition aides, housekeeping and laundry aides. At this time, that's the only job category where somebody doesn't need some sort of certification or registration to work in long-term care. So from a recruitment and retention, on the one hand, it's getting a little more difficult to find staff. At the same time, those measures are put in place because we're serving a very, very frail and vulnerable population. And I want a registered nurse working for my grandma and grandpa. Housekeeping, laundry aides, maintenance workers in spiritual enrichment, administration, the full spectrum, finance, payroll, IT, HR, supervisors, managers, health and safety, etc. These are some of the job opportunities in our long-term care homes in the province. From a partnership perspective, this is the stuff that really turns my crank, our interest to leverage the homes within our community to serve a broader purpose and develop meaningful partnerships with other organizations within the community. We've been focusing on Brock University, DeGroote School of Medicine, and Niagara College for things like registered nurses placements. At one time, this area was hit with the closure of the Mac School of Nursing. And the whole health field was just like, why did we do that? And Brock put in place a registered nurses program that grew and grew. And we're at the point now where we have registered nurses choosing our homes and other organizations for their consolidation before they graduate and get their licensing. So the partnership with Brock has been a really good one, certainly in the context of applied health sciences research and on seniors and issues in quality. I'm scratching my head a little bit in the part of the province that has the highest percentage of seniors, why there isn't more activity like this going on. So we want to nurture that relationship with Brock and DeGroote to see what we can do from an applied research perspective, ultimately to help out the people and make life easier for the people that we're caring for. Therapeutic recreation placements, again, offering the homes up for placement programs. And Goodman School of Business, we had some MBA students provide us with some a business case ultimately to go into a more technological. In the last 5 years, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our staff publicly for embracing all the change that we've done over the last 5 years. We've gone from a lot of paper-based stuff to web-based, electronic cloud-based kind of implementations for payroll and monitoring your own benefits online and those kinds of things. And it's really challenged the employees, but it started here with a group of MBA students that said, we could be doing some of these things in this sector. So that's been great. DeGroote School of Medicine, again, the Niagara campus, led by Dr. Carl Stobbe. We're working on some initiatives there around quality. Quality. That's the big buzzword. It's on the provincial radar, it's on the LIN radar, it's on the homes radar. I think there was a comment here made about customer service. And this whole notion of quality, we really want to embrace that. And our homes, and in our sector, we typically haven't thought that way. And sometimes, from a customer service perspective, how do we, in all our staff, how do we see ourselves as we're responding to our customers' needs? We sometimes don't think of it as customer service, or maybe we haven't given it as much thought as maybe we should. So we're launching with Brock and DeGroote on it's called an I-EQUIP model. It's an acronym for an interdisciplinary quality improvement initiatives in long-term care, and they're working with NHS and other organizations as well to raise our bar on quality from here to here through a number of initiatives involving student placements and staff interface. Niagara College, certainly with the registered practical placements. One of the things that's shifting in long-term care, whereas at one time it was the nurse that was in charge of everything, the RPNs, more and more expectations being placed on registered practical nurses to take leadership roles in long-term care. So when we were building our new home, and it was going to be a larger home, we really needed to think strategically well in advance of opening up the home to see what we could do to partner with Niagara College to have some placement students come in for RPN. It worked out that through that initiative we were able to hire, I think, between 9 and 12 RPNs through that Niagara College program. So these kind of partnerships are real, functional, and they're very necessary in our field. So that's our little way of helping to prepare business, clinical, and service leaders in our own community, and we're glad to be able to do that. Business opportunities in long-term care, service contracts from soup to nuts, literally from raw foods to service contracts, maintenance, yard care, signage, etc. And I'd be remiss today, I was talking to Travis already before we started lunch, I'd be remiss if I didn't share with the business community some potential development that's coming down the pike. In 2007, the Ontario government announced a $3 billion commitment to upgrade and renovate old and aging long-term care homes in the province of Ontario. Of the 78,000 long-term care beds, 35,000 of those are targeted and slated for redevelopment. And the government has made it really, well, challenging in the context of the Act. If you have an old home that needs to be redeveloped, your license to operate is now 15 years. And we're 5 years into that 15-year license. If you have a brand new home, your license to operate was 25. They just extended it to 5 more years to 30 years. So Tabor Manor, as an example, new home, we have a 30-year license to operate 2 years in. Pleasant Manor, we have a 41-bed home that needs to be redeveloped, and we're 5 years into a 15-year license. We have to redevelop. And there's other homes in the province of Ontario in our local community that need to be redeveloped inside of 9 or 10 years. I want to talk a little bit about that. Yep. Okay, and I'm coming up to the last couple of slides. I'll focus on this one here. Okay, there's 16 homes in this region, in the municipality, 31 beds in this region that need to be redeveloped. The majority of them are in the St. Catharines area, with some of the surrounding communities here. Oops. And this last slide here is the money shot. It costs between $150,000 and $230,000 per bed to build long-term care. About $240 to $275 per square foot. Anyways, in St. Catharines, we could be looking at between $113.5 and $174 million of development in the next 9 or 10 years if all the homes in St. Catharines were to develop. So that's something that I think this group would be interested in. Some takeaway points: long-term care is a specialized form of accommodation and services on the health continuum, different than retirement homes and seniors' life lease housing, different than condominiums and rental apartments. Long-term care is synonymous with nursing homes, but we like to refer to ourselves as long-term care because of that next point. Thanks to you for helping our sector in referring to our long-term care homes as homes and not institutions or facilities. Long-term care homes operate under different MOs: private, for-profit, private, not-for-profit, municipal. And long-term care is a highly regulated sector, second to nuclear power. Long-term care homes offer the local community with a wide range of opportunity for employment, partnership, and business. And if all the B's and C homes in Niagara were to develop in 10 years, it represents between $250 and $380 million of development. And that is it. And thanks for your invitation and your time.